All right, so part two, let's go ahead and expand the whole post-it note thing. So when I say post-it notes, what I like to do is I tell people either have this in a really obvious place, or I actually go and buy those little cork boards. You can get them pretty cheaply. And so I just get like a little, 1 by 1 foot cork board, and I put it in a really visible place. And from there, I tell the kids, okay, so let's start with 3 tasks, because again, this is about eventually creating intrinsic motivation. But at first, we're going to create an extrinsic motivation, because that's kind of how the ADHD brain works, right? So you take this cork board, or if you don't have that, maybe, I don't like using whiteboards because the sticky notes don't stick to them, and it's important that they are sticky notes. There's something tactile about those notes. And I also tell them make sure that you get different colored sticky notes. And yes, the color is also important. Again, when we're thinking about ADHD brains, oftentimes we don't know why these things work, but they do work. Color for ADHD brains it's actually really important. So I say, let's start with 3 tasks. So let's boil down those 3 tasks. We take these 3 Post-its, and for the 3 Post-its that I'll talk about, I'm going to say, okay, so for me, one of my tasks that I hate doing is balancing the checkbook. And then maybe also for a kid, it might be doing their math homework. And let's just say the final thing is something to do with paperwork. So maybe answering emails, or going through and doing an essay or something like that. So the next part of this is actually movement. And you're probably saying to yourself, oh my gosh, they have to like get up and move. And yeah, actually they do. If you think about a video game, you're not standing on the same board every single time. You're not standing in the same place every single time. You are getting up and moving. And ADHD kids need to get up and move. And so I tell them that you need to take these pink sticky notes, and on those pink sticky notes, they need to put a designated place for them to get up and move to go do that task there. So maybe they balance the checkbook in the office, maybe they do the math homework at the kitchen table, maybe they answer the emails or read the essays, or write the essays outside. But seriously, on the actual physical pink sticky note, put a pathway or a movement so that they have to get up and move from where they are. So from the pink sticky notes, we are going to move into the tally board, and that's the last part. And the tally board is going to be different for each kid. When you first start doing this, I always recommend to have something that is like a physical, tangible thing. And you want to go from first task needs to be kind of small. So maybe the first task, once they've completed it, they grab a sticker and they put the sticker on the hand, right? And then for the second task, once they've completed it, they get to have some sort of a snack break, whether it's a piece of candy or a juice box, whatever. And then the last one, the third one, is where they get the big break. So for them, maybe that's taking some time and saying, okay, now I get 20 minutes to play video games. And be careful with this. I always recommend that you go and take a look at the Pomodoro method. Because those breaks, especially for the ADHD brain, can end up taking a lot longer than they probably should. So, I always say give the break, but make sure that you have a timer for the break and stop at that time. So the third thing isn't necessarily the end of the tasks. And, I know that it seems kind of silly, but it really is actually important that they are different colors. Like I said, ADHD brains are very visual. And so having yellow Post-its for beginning, pink Post-its for movement, and then finally blue Post-its for whatever reward that we're going to do, that helps feed into the feedback loop. So let me explain a little bit more about the feedback loop. The feedback loop is actually really important to understanding why kids are able to play Minecraft for 4 hours and craft an entire, castle, but can't do their math homework for 15 minutes. And I know that you're thinking to yourself, feedback loop, I can give you a feedback loop. I can stand over you and scream at you to work. But that doesn't actually work for the ADHD brain. And if you have an ADHD brain, it doesn't work for you. You sitting there screaming at yourself to work, that is not the type of feedback loop that actually works, okay? The reason that it works in video games, and the video game industry has figured this out and they use it to their advantage, and that means that you can use it to your advantage too, is that it does a series of dopamine triggering things. The first thing that it does is that it wants you to understand something, right? And so you have a task, whether that task is balancing your checkbook, or doing math homework, or writing an essay, right? So you have to do a thing, okay? The next thing is that it wants you to take an action, and the creation of the cork board and all of those little Post-it notes, that's actually you taking an action when you're filling out that cork board and you're doing all the post-it work, you're actually taking an action, and that rewards your dopamine center. And again, especially when you have ADHD, there is a lack of dopamine in your brain, and so your brain is seeking that out. The third thing that it wants you to do, and this is what video games do very well, is that certain rules are applied. So if you're in a video game and you try to do something and it doesn't work, you have to try something else. And so it sparks your curiosity. And once you figure out the rule, you're able to understand that the rules are applied, and now it's become a game and your brain has learned something new and it finds that very interesting. For us, the rules are applied actually have to do with physical space. So like you going on a quest from doing your checkbook balancing in the office to sitting down at the kitchen table to do your math homework, that's actually you applying the rules. I'm not allowed to do this thing in this area. I have to move myself. And then the very last part is the feedback. And the feedback needs to be at least non-judgmental. It doesn't have to be positive every time, but it needs to be at least non-judgmental. So grabbing a sticker or checking something off on a checkbox, something along those lines, it needs to be in some way, shape, or form, if not positive, then at least non-judgmental. Because when you're playing a video game, if you mess up and you die, you may feel a little bad, but you get to do it all over again. Having your parents scream at you for hours creates, this sort of emotional response in our brains. And again, especially for the ADHD brain that is already lacking dopamine, that means that it creates a negative understanding, which then we associate in the future with all of the other parts of having to do homework and things like that. So when we talk about gamification, this is a way, and I know right now you're probably saying to yourself, this is silly, I'm not going to do this, but if you want to help your kid or yourself get the thing done, try this. Do it with 3 tasks and see if it motivates your brain and see if it eventually creates intrinsic motivation. You screaming at your brain, why won't you just work and do the things that you're supposed to do? Obviously, if you're here with me, it hasn't worked up to this point. So give this a try and just see what happens. The last thing I want to mention is the fact that this is not always true for people who have a specific type of ADHD that's much more anxiety focused. That is an entirely different video. So if you are the type of person that can work without stopping, but then you burn yourself out, just know that this method may not be the method you should want to use. Instead, that is an entirely different type of method, and I actually teach that in my ADHD executive functioning course on OutSchool. But yeah,